if you haven't been already to one of our innovative methods seminars, a little bit of an intro to who I am and what we're all about. So my name is Gemma. I'm based at the University of Glasgow. I'm an interdisciplinary research fellow based in what's called the Digital Society and Economy interdisciplinary research theme. Always quite a mouthful introducing myself. And what we do is we've been running these seminars for a little while. We had two last semester. My colleague Lavinia ran them last year. She'll be taking back over from the next one onwards. And basically, the idea is just to explore some interesting ways of finding things out. Most of us will be coming from academia, but due to the nature of such interesting talks we've been having, and what we've kind of been covering and where it's been posted online, we've also got some brilliant people joining us from the worlds of journalism and think tanks and futurism and so on and so forth. So wonderful to have so many of you with us. This is a pretty chill seminar. What we're going to do is we're going to have Tim present to you his work for, I think we said about 20, 30 minutes, Tim, didn't we? And then we're going to go into questions and discussions. So really, really want to give lots of time for you all to ask questions and for Tim to discuss some of the ideas that he brings up. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat as Tim goes, so that it's there. But once Tim stops speaking, we'll invite you to turn your mic and camera on if you want to ask a question, or if you don't want to do that, you can put it in the chat. I'll be monitoring that as well. But so please do think of your questions while Tim's chatting, because we're going to want to have a nice lively discussion at the end. I'm going to just do a quick shout out for our next session, which I'll be sending around the details, but just so you know while I've got you. Our next Innovative Methods seminar is going to be on Friday, 15th of March from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. And this one, the title of this one is Relief Maps, New Visual and Digital Methods for Data Collection, Analysis and Visualization of Intersecting Inequalities. And this was a brilliant session I saw when I was at the Royal Geographical Society conference down in London last year. And it's basically about mapping emotions, inequalities and intersectionalities using GIS software. So I'm really excited to have Maria, who's going to be coming and speak to us about that. As I say, I'll send around all details to everyone who's registered if you would like to come along. We're recording this session. We will only post Tim's actual talk. We won't post the questions. So if anyone's worried about that, please don't. And we'll share that again with all the attendees afterwards so that you can rewatch or share with your colleagues or whatever else you might want to do. Right, I think that's probably enough for me. I'm going to pass on to Tim. Do enjoy, and I'll be back once Tim's finished to help moderate the Q&A. Tim, over to you.
Many thanks, Gemma, and delighted for the invitation, and also many thanks to all who have joined. I am Dr. Tim Peacock, and I am also Dr. Tim Peacock. And that's one of the challenges that we find is that our identities increasingly are affected by the technologies that we are using to communicate. Now, great! I'm already seeing folks using the reaction keys at the bottom of the screen. Do feel free to use that, sort of whether it's smileys or thumbs up or sort of tears of laughter as you think, what is this person talking about? But I'm here today hoping to take you just through a few brief snapshots of using games as and for research. And in terms of the slides that you will see, do not worry, as not all of them will necessarily manifest themselves for that long. Some of them will just be, again, sort of snapshots, but I will bring these up. And can everyone see this okay? Use your reaction keys. Yep, I'm seeing reactions. I'm even seeing physical reactions of thumbs up. This is great, and that's one of the things that we find increasingly is just the range of reactions and how these themselves feed into games and gaming. By day, I'm a lecturer in history and war studies at the university, and also by day, I'm co-director and founder of the Games and Gaming Lab, UofGGamesLab. And you can see on screen an image of part of one of the teams that has worked on projects with me at the lab, in this case on Project GameStorm, which was looking at new ways of gaming approaches to global challenges, including in the first instance, the challenge of nuclear decommissioning and policy making. And that's very much an ongoing initiative. So the game plan for this sort of whistle-stop tour is just a brief bit of context on Games and Gaming Lab and my research. some of the potential for digital or video gaming in research, challenges in games and research. And I put some challenges because we can't necessarily capture all of them, but can discuss more in the Q&A, and reflections on a handful of projects that are in some cases completed, in some cases ongoing, around Minecraft, Ellisland, war games, and space gaming. Thinking briefly about the future, rather appropriate given Back to the Future Part 4 is going to be on the horizon soon. And then any questions. And a couple of questions to think about just as we are exploring this. What are digital or video games? And I know that it may seem to be a case of thinking, well, you know, we can see the latest releases on the shelves, but then going back even more broadly, are the very systems themselves that we are using for communication or for our work becoming in some ways gamified or becoming digital or video games in themselves? If we play physical games, but we play them on Zoom, as during the pandemic, then to what extent are they becoming digital? I think that this is especially a question that in the upcoming work on the possibilities of a metaverse, of life and the virtual or the digital increasingly interacting, is something that it's helpful for us to really think about as to how we define games and the digital. And in what ways might we potentially research these games or use them as tools in research? Because often we find that games are the subject of research rather than necessarily the method or the approach. And the images on the right here are of something that is very much an analog game, the great game Waterloo Replayed, a world record-setting tabletop war game of over 20,000 miniatures and over 100 players who are all veterans of much more recent conflicts, taking place at the University of Glasgow in 2019. But although this is something that is very much analog, there is also a very strong digital element to it. The armies involved having their own Twitter accounts, which is something that you would expect, of course, in the Battle of Waterloo. And so it's just one small example of the ways in which the physical and the digital in gaming increasingly are interacting. And I would also say that in terms of our work, this can very much range in the gaming lab from the physical to the digital, whether it is a tabletop or map-based gaming, through to virtual reality headsets and all that goes with that. So what is Games and Gaming Lab? Well, it has these days over 300 members beyond and within University of Glasgow. This includes staff and students, both undergraduate and postgraduate, as well as members who are affiliated from external companies and organizations, universities around the world. And we do a range of different activities, from running or supporting events to experimental and technical projects, or ET projects, the flying bicycles, as we like to call them. You bring us your bicycle of an idea, and we will try to help you make it fly. And whether it is from NATO to COP26 to Pokemon, I hasten to add that's using Pokemon as a subject of research or engagement rather than our engaging with the creators of Pokemon, though we have our aspirations, we can dream. We work across a wide range of public, private, and charitable organizations, and we're always happy to talk about and or to promote potential game-related projects. And that is ranging from, as you see here, our symposium on history and archaeology being used in games and gaming, to space in gaming later in 2019 for the 50th anniversary of Apollo 12. And although during the pandemic we've not had as much opportunity to do in-person events, that has then picked up again, particularly in the last year or so, in the Advanced Research Center at the university, as shown here with the Arcadia and Arc Green Games nights. And we've also been engaging more recently with the newer developments in such areas as generative AI, shown here in an image from an AI and gaming security workshop. And my own research within this is very much a combination of nuclear history, space history and space security, games and wargaming, AI and politics. And whether that is doing tabletop wargaming with potential policymakers, through to building a Minecraft version of Robert Burns's farm, working with Robert Burns's farm. It was not something that we expected, but we've been delighted to engage with that project. And we find that through our membership, we've seen a lot of benefits as well with games and gaming in terms of education and outreach. And the example I cite here is from one of our university's alumni, Scott Manley, who is based in San Francisco, is a member of Games and Gaming Lab. We much appreciated his doing the keynote a few years ago for us. And he has over 1.5 million YouTube channel subscribers, and he uses video games as a means of reaching out and explaining concepts relating to rocket science and wider science and science fiction. And so his is an exemplar of just one of the many ways in which games are increasingly being used to communicate and to think about and imagine the future. But how can we potentially use games as and for research? And there are various different reasons or ways in which we can use this. And in part, my work is very much inspired by scholars, including Andrew Hoskins and William Merrin, who have looked more widely at digital technologies and systems even before getting into games and gaming, as well as by scholars in sort of historical game studies, like Adam Chapman's work on sort of digital games and history. I think one of the first things with games that we may find surprising is failure. Digital games allow us to fail in a safe environment and to learn from this. For as Master Yoda himself once said, the greatest teacher failure is. Apologies for the accent, but that is a thing. That sort of we often think of games as being we seek to win, but failure can actually be a really valuable thing through these games. We can fail without then that being an irreparable loss. You can then learn from this and get better and try new things out. And digital games allow us to innovatively simulate increasingly complex systems. You look at some of the games that exist today online are simulating entire economies or societies, even entire ecosystems with many, many moving parts and hundreds of thousands of players in some cases. And of course, there are limitations of such engines. But even on a social level, seeing these entire interactions is, in some cases, quite remarkable, what is possible through these systems. As is the immersive engagement potential and things that are multimodal. Video games or digital games, they can engage you through video, through images, through text, through different layers of audio. And I think sometimes we take for granted just what that means. Yes, there is music, yes, there are sounds, but even the background acoustics, the environment that you can garner through a video game, for example. And that's before even going into the realms of vibration or haptic feedback on the controllers, or getting into the realms of virtual and augmented reality, as we see through increasingly through things like the Apple Vision Pro and the different virtual reality headsets that are being developed. But even without going into that level of immersion, sometimes even a game with a compelling storyline that has two-dimensional graphics and a series of text boxes can be enough to invite us into this imagined world. An improved data collection, which users themselves actually generate and capture. You look at the sheer number of videos that are being generated online, including things like Let's Play, where players not only play through a game, they record themselves doing so, and they sometimes will record their own reactions. We can actually see their faces, we can hear their voices, we can share in their experience. And this is in itself sometimes a curated experience in which they are playing to the crowd, they are performing. It can even be a collaborative experience in which people have live streamed this, and their followers will engage in chat or comment on what they are doing. Sometimes they'll even take on board ideas from the chat in order to compel them to change their play style. And this type of material and the potential for using it in studying how players play is even before we get into the level of technical detail, because we can do things like measuring down to the very commands that players are putting in and where they are looking in a given part of the screen to try and think about why decisions are made. And that goes into as well the question of imagining. Through these games, we can help to imagine pasts and presents and futures and do all-round testing of human responses to these. You can increasingly in these digital environments change and manipulate the environments to reflect new variables and to test this. And I think that it's really interesting to pick up the point in the chat that, do you think Twitter is an alternate reality game? If so, can we defend democracies against widely distributed and unregulated network operations by autocratic regimes? I think that's a really interesting comment, because in a sense, that is the, and it very much ties back into these ideas of the data collection and the imagining, because I think that thinking about these systems not only as communication tools, but also as forms of game, raises all sorts of interesting possibilities then of thinking about, well, how do we approach them as a system? And I think that in terms of defending against, one of the things that I would say is, how do we, if we look at existing things like massive multiplayer online communities, how do they sort of self-regulate, where, if they do self-regulate, and how do they deal with some of these challenges, particularly where influence is part of the battle. And in some cases, you have groups within these gaming worlds that are, it's very much that they are designed to, all the scenarios they build are designed to engage with these large numbers of people, to draw them into their communities, and to engage in simulated conflict. And in terms of illuminating alternate perspectives, being able to see the past, the present, and the future from new angles. I don't know if anyone has come across the movie Hoodwinked, and a very interesting, surreal rendition of Little Red Riding Hood meeting sort of a detective novel. One of the things I find really interesting about that movie is this idea of being able to see the same story, but from completely different perspectives. And the digital technology of these games potentially offers us that opportunity to go back and look through the eyes of our opponents, or even through the eyes of people who are observers to a battle, and to see things in a very different way. Of course, that's not to say that using games as or for research, there are also significant challenges. And one of those significant challenges is this rather stark meme-like image. What are we seeing here? What we are seeing here is a photoshopped image. I did not create this, I hasten to add, this is on the internet, of Mahatma Gandhi as featured in the Civilization video game series, with nuclear explosions in the background. one of the double ironies here from a history standpoint is that those explosions are actually from US nuclear tests, specifically from Shot Grable of Operation Upshot Knothole in 1953 and Castle Bravo from 1954. That's a whole different story. But these come back to a piece of video game lore of the idea of nuclear Gandhi. This notion that because of a bug in the Civilization strategy game, in the early games, that Mahatma Gandhi would go from being one of the most peaceful computer-controlled players on the map to being one who would be most likely to use nuclear weapons against you. Except that is a piece of urban folklore. It is not, it's only under certain conditions. But that in itself illustrates one of the potential challenges of the stereotyping and unintended consequences of systems can follow us into games. And I think if you gave me the chance to, and that indeed many other historians, to communicate what is the single thing that you would like to get across to people about how history is misunderstood beyond the into wider discourse, it would be that it is about more than dates and available data. Because often that is the perception, that history is about recording the dates and it's about the events, it's what happens. But for us, it is also the question of why does it happen? Why do these events occur? Why do these people make these decisions? And also within that, what does it mean? Because of there being these contested hypotheses. And that in itself can be a challenge, because in a game, you have a set of rules, you have victory conditions that are determined, you have potentially a winner and a loser. And yet, when we look at history, it is not necessarily as straightforward. Even to this day, we find in the news that people are putting forward contesting ideas of narratives and trying to claim that there is victory when there is not in a given scenario, whether that is relating to global conflicts or parliamentary conflicts, which we won't get too much into. But, so victory is not always as simple as it can be in digital games. There's also the problems of privacy and consent and sensitivity. Are there subjects that it is not okay for us to put into digital game form? And of course, the older Jurassic Park classic in terms of dinosaurs, just because we could do this, does it mean we should? There's also the problem of method acting and the limits of immersion. You can't fully replicate, even in virtual reality, some of these things that happen in history, nor would you want to. You don't want to replicate what it's like to live through the Black Death. You don't want to replicate what it's like to be in the midst of a war situation, unless you are in a very specific context of training. And even then, there are still the significant ethical and moral considerations. And I think something that generative AI technology has increasingly conveyed to us is the problem of black box technology. It's not just that generative AI works in certain contexts, but how does it work? How does it arrive at that answer? I mean, one of my personal favorites in illustrating this is, of course, that classic online of asking an AI to create an image of salmon jumping in a river. So close, and yet so far. But you can see the challenges there of logic that are involved and the unintended consequences of systems. And in a sense, actually, that games and digital games helps us to test for things like that. We can put all the variables together and see what the unintended consequences are of systems when we put them together. But there's also, I think, an increasingly concerning point, which is this notion that machines can't lie, the failure to question. And the post office computer scandal is just one example. One of my big concerns around generative AI, and one of the things where I think gaming can be really helpful in this, is about not just the generative AI itself, but how people relate to it and how they trust it or don't trust it. and thinking about why you trusted it in a particular case. Because that failure to question, that assumption sometimes that what you're facing is a magic box rather than a black box, is something that in the past has led to terrible consequences. And I think that one of these terrible consequences, rather humorously here, is illustrated by Ethan Mollick's images of a Hello Kitty invasion of the United States, mocked up through generative AI. Now, obviously, this has not happened. And if we did reach the point of this happening, then the world would have taken a far more surreal turn than it already has. But it's about the images that can be created, coming back to the point in the chat, in this gamified form of social media, digitally, creating of images that don't stand out like this, that can lead us to believe something because we have already been psychologically primed to believe it. And in some ways, the use of digital games can help us to look into potential effects of that in terms of communities. And very briefly, I'll just mention a couple of things here, one of which is Minecraft Ellersland, creating Robert Burns's farm in Minecraft. And this is both a means of connecting people to new audiences, to Robert Burns' history, but it is also an experiment in thinking about new ways of engaging with and representing this heritage, and how we do so in a way that is responsible in the years ahead. So we're continuing with parallel research into this that combines both the digital experience with thinking about the physical experience of the farm itself and this history that is connected to it. And I'm very happy to say more about that when it comes to the question period, as we have then explored how we can use models like this across both the physical interactions and the digital interactions, including virtual reality. In the case of war games, and specifically the War Games Jam, we worked with Imperial War Museum to use items from their collections as inspiration for students to create their own research-led video games around the history of warfare, but from new angles that were looking far more at questions of empathy and the civilian experiences of war, among others. And these are still accessible online through Imperial War Museum. And the last thing that I would consider is the question of space and space exploration. And I think that things like Kerbal Space Program have had a significant impact on engaging people and bringing them into ideas of looking at space history and also into rocket science. We know there are rocket scientists who use Kerbal Space Program and who have positively endorsed it. And a toy of a Kerbal has even made it to the International Space Station. Such is their impact. And yet one of the things I'm interested in is how programs like this, or programs like Astroneer, while we study them for how they represent space, is also to see how these and physics engines in the future can be used in order to think through concepts of mission planning and policy making, and to visualize them better, to assist in our thinking about with students and also with potential policymakers, just what these processes are. And this is while recognizing the limits of these systems, but also in using them better to understand and to think about just how is it that we make decisions? What are we seeing when we think through these different processes? Just as equally with things like Stellaris, set in sort of a grand strategy, a sort of competing galaxy of different alien species, we find that there are material from these games is itself being used in large quantities, in some cases to as we see in a YouTube search on Stellaris democracy, that some of this game culture is being mobilized in order to convey real world arguments over future political systems and future of politics. And so it's only through studying these interactions and this use of this type of culture from digital games, that we can better understand how these dialogues are themselves happening virtually. And so in whatever form this future may take, it is not, as William Merrin says, it's not just the single technology. It's not just games. It's what happens when you start combining them. What happens when you combine generative AI, quantum, augmented reality, wearable tech, robotics, spaceflight, maybe even cybernetics. It's what happens when the system comes together that you least expect. It's also the question of accidents and the unknown, and the power of imagination. And through things like Project Damocles and Project Heritage, we're just taking a little look into some of these, and I can talk more about that in the question period. But to leave on a more positive note, as Doc Brown would say, your future hasn't been made yet, so make it a good one. Thank you very much.